In the deep mountains and quiet valleys of western Mexico, there once lived a man whose name alone could make people tremble. His name was Nemesio El Mencho Oseguera Cervantes, and for years he was one of the most feared and most powerful leaders of organized crime. He wasn't a character in a movie, he was real, and his cartel brought fear to millions, with violence and power that stretched across borders. El Mencho led the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, often called CJNG, a group known for its ruthlessness and its ability to avoid capture. Governments and military forces from Mexico and the United States worked for years trying to find him. They offered huge rewards, more than $15 million, for anyone who could point them to his location. And still, he slipped through their fingers again and again. Because of how dangerous he was, rumors and stories about him filled the news. Some said he was hiding in the mountains. Others said he watched every move his enemies made. People whispered that nothing could touch him. But deep down, every powerful person has a weakness, and for El Mencho, that weakness wasn't a weapon or a weakness in strategy. It was something much more human. Connection, closeness, and companionship. That's where this story changes. This is not a story about numbers or battles. It's a story about how a man who spent decades hiding from the world ultimately was found because of the people in his life, because of the people he trusted. And in the end, those connections led him into the open in a way no army or intelligence unit ever had before. When his enemies searched for him, they didn't look for the grand fortress or the vast army. They looked closely at his world, at the people who mattered to him. Among these people was someone he cared about deeply, someone he chose to spend time with, even though he knew doing so was dangerous. A romantic partner. In February of 2026, that decision, to meet someone he cared about in a quiet mountain town, would become the moment that changed everything. It wouldn't be a spy's radar or a satellite's eye that finally closed in on El Mencho. It would be the trail of someone close to him. For years, Mexican authorities had chased shadows. But this time, an unexpected piece of information began to make sense. Intelligence agents learned that one of El Mencho's romantic partners was planning to meet him. They didn't know exactly when or where, but they knew that if they could follow her movements, they could get closer to him than ever before. And so the hunt, the anticipation, and the tension all began to focus on one simple question: where was she meeting him? The next part of the story, how authorities tracked her, and how that led to the final confrontation, is where this dramatic chapter really begins. For years, El Mencho had managed to stay hidden from the world's most powerful military and intelligence forces. He was a legend, the leader of a violent cartel that had spread its influence across Mexico and beyond. Governments offered huge rewards for information that could lead to his arrest. But he always managed to stay one step ahead. Then, something unexpected changed the game. It wasn't a secret tip from an undercover agent or a massive satellite sweep that led the authorities to him. Instead, it was someone close to him, someone he cared about. Mexican military intelligence began following the movements of one of his romantic partners. They learned that she was going to meet him in a small town called Tapalpa, high in the mountains of Jalisco State. It was a peaceful place, full of cabins and forest trails, far from the chaos of the cities where most cartel violence takes place. When his girlfriend left the meeting place the next day, intelligence agents knew something important. El Mencho was still there. This moment gave them the breakthrough they had been searching for. For the first time in years, they had a precise location where he was staying with his trusted security detail. This was not luck. It was patience, persistence, and extraordinary surveillance work. Mexican officials worked day and night to confirm the information. They used a combination of military surveillance, aerial observation, and intelligence shared with partners abroad to make sure they didn't make a mistake. The world had been looking for El Mencho for so long, yet it was the trail of someone he trusted that finally revealed his hiding place. Once they had confirmation, there was no turning back. The moment had come. The authorities had found him, hidden deep in a peaceful mountain town, unaware that the people searching for him were closing in. This was the beginning of the end. When the Mexican military and special forces finalized their plans, The sun was beginning to dip behind the rugged hills of Jalisco. Soldiers and intelligence operatives moved in, working quietly but with intense focus. They knew this was a risky mission. Mencho was not just another target. He was one of the world's most dangerous men. They organized themselves into units. Some would approach by land through winding mountain roads. Others would provide support from above with helicopter reconnaissance. Every movement was calculated. There was no room for error. And all night long, they waited for the right moment. For the people inside that mountain cabin, it was an ordinary night, or at least as ordinary as a night can be for someone living a life like Mencho's. He was surrounded by a small group of trusted fighters, armed and ready, not knowing that hundreds of trained soldiers were closing in around them. The air was thick with tension. For the soldiers, every minute felt like hours. They were about to face a man who had survived his enemies for years, someone who had never been caught and who had always fought back fiercely. They knew that once they made their move, there might be no turning back. Then, just before dawn, everything changed. The operation began. Soldiers surrounded the area. Helicopters hovered above. And in the quiet mountain air, something powerful and unstoppable was about to unfold. In the first light of dawn, the silence of the Jalisco mountains was shattered by the sound of movement. Elite Mexican forces hit the compound where Mencho was hiding. This was no quiet arrest. The moment had become a full-blown battle. As the soldiers moved in, members of the cartel opened fire with heavy weapons. The crack of rifles and the roar of engines filled the air. The fighters defending Mencho fought back fiercely because for them, losing their leader meant everything. Caught in the crossfire, Mencho and his closest guards tried to escape into the thick forest behind the cabin. Branches snapped under their feet as they ran, trying to put distance between themselves and the soldiers. But the military was relentless. Within moments, they found him, wounded and unable to continue. He was quickly secured by the soldiers and placed on a helicopter for emergency medical transport. But despite their efforts, Mencho's injuries were too severe. He died during the flight to the hospital. In that moment, the man who had once seemed untouchable, feared by millions and hunted by countless forces, breathed his last. A life lived in the shadows, always listening for footsteps behind him, had finally come to an end. Mencho's death didn't bring immediate peace. In fact, it sparked chaos across Mexico. Cartel members, angry at losing their leader, erupted in violence. Roads were blocked with burning vehicles. Fires were set. Armed groups attacked public infrastructure. It was as if the cartel wanted to show the world that even without Mencho, they still had power. At least hundreds of violent incidents were reported across many states, from blocked highways to clashes with security forces. National Guard members, soldiers, and suspected cartel members were killed in the retaliation. Some cities saw skies filled with smoke and people urged to stay inside for their safety. But Mexican security forces did not back down. Thousands of soldiers were deployed to restore order. And slowly, normal life began to return, though the memory of those violent days remained burned into the minds of many. For the world, Mencho's death was a significant moment, a major blow against one of the most powerful criminal figures in recent history. But for Mexico, it was a reminder of how deep and complex the fight against organized crime really is. In the end, one man was gone. But the challenges of peace and justice remained, and the people of Mexico continued to hope for a safer, more peaceful future. Mencho spent decades hiding from the world, and in the end, it wasn't a soldier or a spy that found him. It was trust. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, hit that like button and subscribe. There are more untold stories like this one coming. Drop a comment. Who do you think was the most powerful cartel leader in history? I'll see you in the next one.